Here's an interesting question. In the millions of years life has been developing on Earth, why is it that humans are the only ones that are capable of creativity? I mean, bees have always been making hives, whether millions of years ago or today. Badgers have always been making tunnels, whether millions of years ago or today. Birds have always been making nests, whether millions of years ago or today. However, human beings have not always been making just mud huts or just stone castles or just glass structures, pyramids, underground bunkers, or carved homes in mountains. Our creativity is something that has us creating it all. Why? Why are we the only species capable of such creativity? The answer to this will also teach you how you can become more creative and intelligent in your own day-to-day life. Now, Noam Chomsky proposed an answer to this question when he said,
"And there's something in our genetic endowment that determines that we have a human language faculty. No other organism has anything remotely similar."
You might be a bit confused. What does our ability for language have to do anything with our ability to be creative as a species? Well, ponder this other quote by Chomsky that elaborates on this question.
Language is the sort of the core of human cognitive nature. It's the source, it's the mode for constructing thoughts and expressing them. And that is what forms thought. And it's got fundamental creative capacities. It's free, independent, unbounded, and so on. And undoubtedly, I think the basis for our creative capacities and the other remarkable human capacities that lead to the unique achievements and not so great achievements of this species.
So the missing link to the confusion was cognition, the ability to think. We always thought of language only as an ability that allows us to share our thoughts with one another from our own species. In other words, language was only thought of as symbols used to communicate. While this is true, it's not what language is in its entirety. You see, communication is something we do with almost everything else besides language anyway. The way we walk communicates something. What we own in terms of our material possessions communicates something. Our hairstyle, our facial expressions, who we surround ourselves with. All of these things are ways we communicate with others and give people whatever impression we want them to have of us. So if language doesn't just exist for us to communicate, what does it really exist for? The answer to this question has stirred up one of the biggest shifts in cognitive psychology ever since its inception: the cognitive revolution. The cognitive revolution was a shift in the field of psychology from behaviorism, which dominated the early 1900s, to cognitivism, which would become prominent later on. One of the lead figures for this revolution was Noam Chomsky. As far as Chomsky understands it, he says, "It seems like language is a mode of creating and interpreting thought itself." This would explain some groundbreaking research that shows people who learn a language with a richer vocabulary for color can actually identify more hues of color than other people. It's a shocking discovery, I know, and this brings debate on whether language impacts cognition directly or indirectly, but that's a whole separate topic. Just understand that language does impact cognition, and that learning a language means that you are acquiring a framework to organize and interpret your very own thoughts. This cognitive structure we call language facilitates creativity by allowing us to think in novel and imaginative ways. This is what makes us different from animals, our unique language. Now that you understand language impacts cognition and facilitates creativity, how does this help you become more intelligent in your day-to-day life? Well, let's once again take a look at what Chomsky has to say.
A core principle and requirement of a fulfilled human being is the ability to inquire and create constructively, independently, without external controls.
This was a quote on him explaining what it means to be educated. I want us to focus on the last phrase, without external controls. If I just asked you what it means to be educated, you might say it's a PhD or a Nobel Prize. But these things didn't exist 200 years ago. So this same word, educated, would have had a different meaning in the past than some people might think today. Language is always changing depending on the social, cultural, and political events in the civilization that speaks it. Colonization would actually be a positive term back when the oppressed civilian population of Constantinople requested the Muslim armies to conquer them so that they could do away with their tyrannical rulers and enjoy life under their new conquerors. The same word, colonization, would have become negative when Britain expanded throughout the globe, slaughtering and oppressing the populations they conquered. Same word, but different definitions due to the lived experiences behind it. Now, beyond just the connotations of the definition, the intensity of the definition can vary as well. Genocide has always had a negative definition. However, it had a different intensity in its meaning in the 20th century for the Jews who suffered a genocide themselves, just as it has a different intensity in its meaning in the 21st century for the Palestinians suffering a genocide as well. Language changes depending on the social, cultural, and political experiences of its population. It is externally manufactured. This is true with almost every word you use. Just define for me, what is good? What is bad? What is success? What is failure? Whatever answer you give, you're likely coming up with that from the top of your head. You didn't read this in the dictionary or study its definitions and how it evolved over time. You'll define success differently if you were brought up in a sheltered and comfortable home compared to a broken and abusive home. This is why it becomes important to study the meaning of the words you actually use, because we always learn language through inference, just seeing how others use it around us. Learning the actual meaning instead of the inferred meaning of a word quite literally deprograms your mind that has spent the past decade building up meanings through experiences. This is why when Chomsky says that the core principle and requirement of a fulfilled human being is the ability to inquire and create constructively, independently, he specifies without external controls. And once you're able to understand language through the actual definition and not your own experiences and inferences, you can begin thinking clearly instead of through bias. You can build ideas and criticize ideas like never before. You can persuade people and deter people like never before. Just take the example of one of the most influential civil rights activists of the 20th century, Malcolm X. When he was asked how he went from a grade 8 dropout who could barely read or write basic sentences that turned to a life of crime and drugs and got arrested, end up becoming one of the most influential and articulate activists in American history. How? The secret lies in what he described to be the most decisive years of his life. The 6.5 years he spent in prison. What did he do, you might ask? He taught himself to read and write by copying the entire English dictionary word by word, page by page, and committing every single definition to memory. A serious endeavor to understand language and its true definitions according to the dictionary rather than warped and manufactured definitions according to our own experiences and inferences. What's the result? A man who reigns superior to his opponents, capable of conveying ideas and realities to the masses and orchestrating a social movement that completely shifted the course of American history. Learn the meaning of the words you use, and you will find yourself breaking the limits of your own imagination. That is the power of language.